The goal of this video is to kind of examine the black gender wars.
When really all the charming things that he did up front, it was never rooted in his character. It was just to emotional cook you.
And the men will ask the women to talk about how bad y'all are. And the women will ask the men, talk about how bad you are.
What if you never find a man who will truly love you? You probably won't.
A man is nothing without a woman.
The black gender wars is a colloquial term loosely used to describe the ongoing conflict between black men and black women that has really been going on in popular black media since we had access to media 70, 80 years ago. I remember all the way back to the early 2000s, seeing black men and black women complain about each other on Black Planet. I remember the
If you feel like you got a better understanding from what he just provided, like, let me know, but like, why? I've never heard this concept before. I'm not gonna lie, I never knew this was even a thing. I figure our problems were, women problems. Women had their own problems and men had their own problems. Like, how could a man hate on a woman and a woman hate on a man when we have two different lifestyles? It just confuses me, but unless maybe it's the black in the title, black gender war. Maybe it's the black. It's not so much the gender where I'm missing, but amen. All right, come on.
The vitriolic and toxic behavior and insults that flew across the World Wide Web on dial-up speed in AOL chat rooms and things I really can't remember, but I know it happened. I remember the call-in radio shows where black men and black women would argue with each other about the same 5 topics that they had been doing probably for generations. If a woman asks you out, does the man have to pay? Who do you make a plate for first, your husband or your father? How do you feel about 50-50 dating? But with the advent of social media, regardless of the fact that we've been talking about this same shit for generations, I feel like this genre of discourse has become more toxic and pervasive and kind of concerning in its overall tone. It feels impossible now to escape this type of content on social media. Red balloon popping videos, 20 versus 1 videos, they're everywhere and they're regularly amassing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views. Plus, we have the alpha male podcast popping up left and right. People are faking outrageous scenarios to farm outrage clicks on Instagram and TikTok. Risa Tisa, random man in Atlanta, femininity.
And for that reason right there, that's why it's good for y'all not to soak that shit up. People eat that shit up and don't even realize that shit be made up. That shit is just created to get more following, more views. Some people be reaching and shit don't even really be as far-fetched as they make it. But that's just,
coaching. All of these things are everywhere, and that's just like the not so toxic stuff that I want to focus on. I only want to get into the ugly shit. It's a plague. It's genuinely a plague. And the funniest thing is, have you ever tried to explain this shit to like normal, healthy people in healthy relationships with healthy social media habits? Have you found yourself struggling to make sense of all the ridiculous characters and colloquial slang and the backstories and grounded theories that you need to explain this nonsense? Do you know your soft life hardwig divester from your passport bro going his own way? If you do, what has that knowledge added to your life? Probably not much. Yet we persist. And I'm sure you found yourself in a gender wars rabbit hole. And when it's done, you ask yourself, why was I there in the first place? How has consuming this content helped me or hurt me? How much time is wasted in these spaces talking about relationships by people who are not in relationships? How many times do we really need to discuss 50-50 dating?
50-50 finances.
I just think that we live in a time where people just are addicted to other people's trauma to get away from their own problems. It's not so much just about what it did for them. It's a relief to see that people are going through things that are, like I said, it's for people to get away from their own problems. But then, aren't you a part of the problem? I don't know.
in relationships is never equal. As a woman, you are bringing so much inherent worth and value to the table, not to mention the large risk you are taking simply by allowing this man to access you.
What are we talking about?
I've been asking these questions for most of my adult life and half of my childhood. And I thought I understood it before, but it wasn't until I started making content myself that I think I really understand it. In fact, I don't think you really can get what's happening if you aren't knowledgeable about how it happens, about how social media works, which some people think they do, but you probably don't. And that's why we're gonna start with Derrick Jaxn. If there were ever a black man who does help us understand all sides of this ongoing discourse, it would be him. He's a man that encompasses almost every aspect of why the Black gender wars exist, all in one complex, bizarre story that I think by looking at his story, we maybe won't stop the onslaught of gender wars nonsense, but at least we'll understand it better. I don't think that has to be gendered, but
it doesn't have to be gendered.
For a woman, for a black woman specifically, when that's not supposed to be possible. And the flip side is the same for me. I'm not supposed to be able to raise, to keep a household on just my work as a man.
Mm-hmm.
And she's not supposed to be able to lean into this, white image of femininity. But
there was structural policy that prevented it for a lot of black women. I think that Shatima Threadcraft speaks about this in Intimate Justice, where, there were labor laws that black women were at home taking care of their households, and the white women, they advocated for black women to have to go to work for them. And if you were seen out leisurely as a black woman, you out here looking like me. I don't want none of that. They were in.
Wow.
If we are okay with something, even if it is not popular, even if it's not what everybody's doing, even if it's going to make us show up a little bit different, if we're okay, let's just be okay.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Let's be okay with the truth of it.
As you say that, I think about the fact that we have always been relatively transgressive, right? We're not poly, by the way, because that always comes up. No shade to my poly people.
No.
It's not us. I feel like people look at us being transgressive and but then overall, they recognize the quality of our relationship. So they're like, whatever it is must be working.
I had a clip from MSNBC, and the brother, the researcher who was talking about it was an economist. And he talked about the high heel effect, right? And the high heel effect is essentially how it is that a number of policies, procedures, things of that nature had been geared towards women in order for women to, once again, engage in equity, inclusion, all of these different things. But if you look at the actual data, all of that shit with the white women, all of it, right? So once again, in the Black community specifically, you all are attempting to emulate it is more so, it's not even a relational, it's an economic dynamic that allows you to relate in this way that we've never had access to.
Right.
So once again, why is this your ideal? Because you believe that it will.
I ain't gonna lie to you. I don't even feel bad no more about my big forehead. The combination of the big forehead and the dreads just means that you're wise. I'm putting it out there for everybody. I'm gonna shut my mouth now.
Will remove you from scrutiny, and you believe that it will allow you to have a feeling of superiority over other people who do not have this access. It will make you feel as if though your life is actually successful.
Right. It takes the taint of the nigga off you.
Wait.
Before we continue, I want to put out a few. It takes the taint of the nigga off you. Before we continue, I want to put out a few disclaimers. First, I want to be clear that this video will pretty much only be focused on relationships between straight black men and straight black women. For one, those are the primary groups that participate in this discourse, and two, that's what I can speak on with expertise. There are robust conversations around queer conflicts within the black community and beyond. If you're interested in discussions that center those experiences, I suggest creators like Khadijah Mbow, Urban Revelist, Cat Black, Jade Fox, Philosopher Noir, etc. But that won't be what this is. Also, the core of this video will focus on black relationship drama and not some of the other uglier aspects of the conflicts that go on between black men and black women that are often pulled into gender wars discourse. The gender wars as a concept is very loaded and a problematic term because it implies that there's two sides to this battle, and in reality, that's not a good way of looking at things for the most part. I'm gonna be focusing on the robust world of male and female oriented dating content for black men and women that drives the gender wars, but there's also the very ugly and rabid world of content dedicated to denigrating, embarrassing, and harming black women, and a corresponding but much smaller version of the same content against black men. So if you're looking for me to comment on some of the uglier situations that have happened between black men and black women that involve sexual violence, assault, or abuse, or things like that, I'm not really gonna touch on that too much. There's already a ton of content discussing those problems and the misogynistic rage bait content that pervades the internet against black women. I've personally done nearly 10 hours worth of videos on the manosphere that I will leave in the description where I get into stuff like that. And I've also done plenty of videos examining the challenges that black men face in the world. So I don't wanna make that what this is. I wanna tread new-ish ground and avoid getting into the darker, more violent stuff, although this will get a little dark. And I also think it's important to remember that those stories get a lot of attention, but they are extremes. And I want to treat them like that in the moment. So with that out of the way, let's jump right on in. Part one.
Was kind of crazy. Okay, we're 10 minutes in. I'm like, we got this far, we still ain't reached part one. Let's dive into it together. Understanding black gender wars, which is something that I have no idea. I didn't know this was a thing, so I'm just here to pass this wisdom upon people because it does have something to do with my people.
A star is born. So if you're normal and healthy and not chronically online in black social media faces, there's a strong chance you don't know who Derrick Jaxn is or why his story is so interesting. So let's fix that. I am dragging you to hell with me. Derrick Jaxn was born in 1989 to a single mother. As the youngest of several children, I couldn't quite pin down the amount of people he grew up with, but the key thing is that he was the only boy. Derrick watched his mother struggle to raise her family on her own, and this experience caused him to develop a strong sense of empathy for the realities of black women and single motherhood in general. In a way, Jaxn attended Tuskegee University where he played football and studied business, but he seemed to have that entrepreneurial spirit, and immediately he leaned into motivational speaking, leadership, and building his platform. And it's hard to say just how quickly he started to make waves, but he quickly started to make waves. The oldest video on his channel is from 2012, and there's no telling like what had been deleted or re-uploaded. I know some of my oldest videos you cannot see. And back then, really, you wanted your stuff not just on YouTube, but Facebook, Worldstar Hip Hop, the Black Blogosphere, etc. And Derrick was regularly going viral in all spaces possible. His earliest content is actually spoken word, which to be honest, should have been everyone's red flag.
People are surprised at her poise and the fact that she's intellectual because she doesn't smack her gum or roll her neck like she was expected to.
In my head, a man that looks like Derrick Jaxn doing spoken word poetry is likely the devil, but I digress. However, let's not avoid the fact that yes, if you're looking at him, Derrick Jaxn kind of reminds you of an extra from a Tyler Perry movie, if Tyler Perry wasn't so colorist against black men. Jaxn was a former tight end for Tuskegee University, and according to what I could find, is around 6'5", and he's got to be around 230, 250 pounds of mostly lean muscle. So Jaxn was a ready-built fantasy of black masculinity. Not only did he look the part, but he was sensitive and well-spoken, and he seemed to love women, but also present a spirit of leadership and authority. He truly had the total package to be popular among black women. And eventually, he very much was. And that made his presence online interesting because here he is talking from his car, like many other black early vlog commentary type creators were doing, except a lot of those guys were very misogynistic. He's coming up at the same time as many of the earliest bastions of the black manosphere are also beginning to take root. So you have Derrick Jaxn right next to guys like Sergeant Willie Pete, Tommy Sotomayor, Angry Man, etc., making this highly vitriolic and harmful content about black women and just being the weirdest types of dudes online. And I imagine that he maybe got mixed up in that because the aesthetics were similar. However, despite what the black manosphere tries to say, their community is not growing. The types of men that truly follow and enjoy that type of content are relatively small in number and low in funds. So there's never much growth potential for those figures to really grow. Although, again, they did go viral on a lot of occasions. Tommy Sotomayor was everywhere in the 2010s. And this made Jaxn, as this lone figure supporting black women, kind of a big deal. If there were a list of A-list social media figures in the mid to late 2010s, he'd have definitely been on that list. And considering the type of image black men were often popularized for having and for the type of treatment black women got online and often got from black men, this was a good thing, period. It was a
I told y'all I feel like niggas that do shit like that is just trying to get pussy. But I don't know nobody. I'm not accusing of anything. I'm just saying.
a good thing to have an image of black masculinity that defied so many negative stereotypes that black women and some black men could look to. But I was always a little suspicious. I was always, you'll see by the end. There was something just a tad off about Derrick Jaxn and his content and the nature of what he was saying. This vibe check was like really close, but not quite where it needs to be. And initially, like way back then, I kind of chalked this up to my own isms around women and sexism and stuff that I was unpacking at the time. And so I mostly just ignored his content because it wasn't for me anyway. But after a few years of grad school and seeing him continue to grow and getting into gender studies and stuff, it hit me why Jaxn wasn't quite right. Although Derrick Jaxn was very pro-black woman, Derrick Jaxn wasn't really much of a feminist. Now, this in isolation shouldn't be a huge red flag. I don't really refer to myself as a feminist, despite what my content tends to project to the world. And this is not because I have an aversion to feminist theory. I'm a person whose core readings in grad school all hinge around feminist gender studies. But it's because of that reading that I recognize that feminists and feminism are loaded terms for a man to describe himself as. And while I think men that call themselves feminists are probably mostly okay, men who promote themselves and monetize themselves as feminists are very much a mixed bag. And if I have to be honest, probably should not be trusted. So I just personally avoid that altogether and hope that my actions speak for me. But that's still not really describing Derrick Jaxn. Derrick Jaxn's actions didn't quite fit the mold of what a male feminist really would be, because his rhetoric and advice about relationships, while being pro-woman, was not quite to the point of engaging with real critical analysis of the challenges women face. It all mostly just hinged on helping women understand how to better fit into traditional ideas and frameworks of what relationship and gender should be, of what a real man should be and what a real woman should be. And to me, that didn't sit right. It felt a little too convenient. However, again, I left it there because very much contradicting everything I just said, I'm going to say something here that might be a bit controversial, but I'm going to die on this hill. For the audience Derrick Jaxn was targeting, the nigga gave good advice.
But if you're treating somebody like they're the only one for you whenever y'all first start off, you're going to continuously waste time trying to teach them how to be right for you when they ain't right for you. And then you're going to get bitter and stay disappointed with your guard up for the next person and possibly miss your blessing. But I've seen women try to take on whatever battle, whatever storm that a dude is going through, they try to take that on themselves. So the biggest asset to you, if you're an empath, is the ability to distinguish between what's involving yourself with and what's not. Not just trying to find somebody who's perfect, but especially when you are trying to get over somebody, whenever you're moving on from somebody, when you just extracted somebody who had became a major part of your life, you do not need to be isolating yourself. There's value in understanding that, yes, I miss him, but I'm still better than what he has to offer. I still deserve more than what he currently has to bring to the table.
I'm sorry, I remember thinking this 10 years ago, and I confirmed it while researching for this video. For the specific demographic of Black women with those relatively conservative churchy upbringings, things we'll talk about a little later, Jackson genuinely did a great job of illuminating elements of love and relationships that those women likely didn't know enough about and were probably.
I apologize, but I genuinely was just looking at myself and I missed the whole little section. So I'm gonna watch that again after, while I'm editing or something. But I need to focus. You need to focus.
Probably hurting their ability to engage effectively in the dating market. Now, while he was good at that, again, he didn't seem to be interested in thinking bigger about why there were so many single mothers, why so many Black men were struggling to maintain gainful employment, why gender roles were constantly in conflict with Black life, and it was so hard for Black men and women to be real men and women. And he had no interest in critiquing those things or critiquing the status quo as a whole. He just wanted to teach women how to win at the game that was being played. And while I have some criticisms that I'll get to later of that, I can't be mad at that. But it does leave some questions, like, why is this the game for Black men and women? Why is advice that hinges on upholding traditional roles so prominent among a group of people where those roles are actually very rare? What set Jackson apart from the Steve Harveys and the Tyler Perrys or even the Kevin Samuelses of the world? All of whom also had substantial audiences of Black women. Yes, Kevin Samuels.
I just want to say I really don't care about this guy. Okay, so we're just gonna follow through. I'm pushing through here. I'm tired of talking about this dude though.
Samuels, believe it or not, had a huge Black female audience. Why is that? Well, I have some theories, but first we're gonna have to do a little history and leave Derek here for quite a while until we get to the last half of the video. Part 2. A real man or a real woman would, yeah, that's a horrible title. Fuck, I'm gonna have to figure out something else for that. Anyway, there's this great and kind of powerful clip that goes viral every once in a while of a conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin. It often gets clipped just for this one section where Nikki is speaking to the designer.
I did a video on that. It's crazy. That's my baby.
Desire for her or Black women in general to be lied to by their men to create harmony in the home. And I've always been annoyed by this clip, mostly because after seeing the whole thing, I think this clip really undermines the depth of this conversation.
If I love you, I can't lie to you.
Of course you can lie to me, and you will. If you love me and you're going off with Maddie someplace, you're lying to me. Because what the hell do I care about the truth? I care if you're there. What Billie Holiday say, hush now, don't explain.
All right, I accept that.
Of course you'll lie to me, because I don't even want to care. What does the truth matter?
Throughout this hour-long exchange, both Nikki and James are trying to basically do one thing, which is get the other individual to understand the profound pain that it takes to perform gender appropriately in a Black body, especially in America, under white supremacy, under capitalism, and to some extent for both, under patriarchy. And with hindsight, it's really frustrating to watch some of the most brilliant minds in Black American history not quite recognize what they're doing. They both seem to realize how impossible what they're asking is, and yet they keep asking it because neither is willing to part with it. They just can't get away from the traditional roles that they have been taught. It speaks to how deeply ingrained the notion of gender is for Black people, despite the fact that the correct performance of gender by American white-centered standards is all but impossible for us to achieve, and we have forever been barred from every lane needed to achieve those ideal notions of masculinity and femininity in this country. So, brace for another hot take. Gender is a scam. And in saying that, I don't mean it in the way that suggests that everyone should be non-binary and use they, them pronouns, or that concepts like masculine or feminine are fake and should be abolished. I still move through the world as a man for a reason, and I think it's a valid reason. What I really mean is that the rules and regulations that we have set up for how we understand and experience and project gender are fake and dumb. And for Black people, they habitually cause us pain. So some of my
That's exactly what I was looking for. But I'm gonna let bro speak, but we getting somewhere. This is why I fuck with him. Okay? When in doubt, trust the nigga with dreads and a big forehead to provide the wisdom every time.
My critics who watch me regularly, because I know you're going to see this may sound rich because I have a relatively traditional patriarchal household. My wife doesn't work and does majority of the housework while I pay all the bills. All my bell hooks and Kimberly Crenshaw reading in grad school, and I still ended up with a trad wife. I'm a fraud, y'all, and I'm sorry. I'm also a secret Republican and a Packers fan. Now, this is obviously not serious, and it doesn't undermine the framework of how progressive politics and belief systems work, because they don't expect or require one way of doing things. The whole point of progressive ideology is self-determination and the idea that there are a multitude of ways to live and experience life, and people should be allowed to do what works for them. But that's not how Black people, or really anybody in this country, looks at the framing of gender. We assume that gender is blank and should be blank. And if you are not blank, whatever that ideal is, then you're not doing gender properly and something must be wrong with you. And this is really fucking stupid because nobody is performing gender in the way that TV and media and our history books tell us we're supposed to. Yes, right now, because I am a wealthy, famous YouTuber, my wife does not have to work. However, up until a couple of years ago, my wife made more money than me. And we had a 50-50 egalitarian household where she did half of the cooking, cleaning, and childcare, and I did half of the cooking, cleaning, and childcare. And
What word did he say? Egalitarian? I'm gonna look that up. Egalitarian. I've never heard that before.
We did that because that's what actually worked for us. And there was really never any tension or issues between us when it came to how we lived our lives. And anybody that may have had a negative thing to think about how transgressive we were in having that egalitarian household definitely didn't say shit to our face. Because one criticism I get consistently, bad faith criticism, but you know, it's one that happens enough, is that I'm some type of like domineering, monstrous patriarch in the home while doing all of the feminisms online. The dynamic we have now is new and not the norm. But at no point in our relationship, including now, has there ever been a your money, my money dynamic.
No, so when we were getting ready to get married, right? Started to make like future plans. Like, this is it. We're going to be each other's person. We started to combine finances even then. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating for that. I don't know if that was right or wrong, but that goes back to how relationships are customizable, right? And so for us, it worked, and we always pulled our money together. Right? Now, no one lost their own account and all that kind of stuff. No one lost access to any money that they earned, but we had the understanding that what we earned was going to go toward building this life that we wanted together.
Right.
But the big thing is we were very in step with the life we wanted.
Yeah.
And we were very vocal when maybe you took a turn or I took a turn. It was like, I was kind of thinking we would go this way. And I think that's what helped us build the confidence to know, like, okay, we can trust each other in that way.
Yeah. The one thing that 9 times out of 10 is contributing to the communication issues in a relationship is gender role expectations, genuinely, right? And if both parties are working in the household, the conversation tends to float around, well, why am I not being treated in this way? And why are you not engaging in this way as it relates to, once again, the division of household labor? So in any respect, right, what I recognize is that the 50-50 conversation is usually a conversation where two people who do not have the access to this quote unquote ideal socioeconomic strata where they're able to perform these gender roles, depending upon how much they've internalized these gender roles, it is correlated to the amount of discomfort that they're going to experience in these spaces. So in other words, you feel like less of a woman because your man don't parade you around out of town and doing X, Y, so you're not able to be in your feminine. You feel like less of a man because you're not able to do any of these things. Why is it that the two of you have internalized these concepts and these conceptualizations as the only way that you can be as an individual, as a person? It's
I know why. Because people need to stop watching other people. If you go every single day and wake up and you go with what you feel, minus all the materialistic shit that's going on, I guarantee you this probably wouldn't happen so much. And then we idolize the wrong things in people. And then we watch other people's life. And then we ask the dumbass question, why isn't that me or why am I not? And that shit stirs up friction. It stirs up friction. People need to start. I can't say what people need to start doing. That's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to close my mouth.
foolish, right? You are arguing over home economics, and economics literally is the way in which you keep a house. Like that's what the word economics means. But that requires a discussion, that requires a negotiation, and that requires both of you all to contribute something. So either way, if your 50 is financial and your 50 is labor, that's still 50-50.
I ordered 200 hand-forged knives to my dorm room and built a Wix website to sell them. I'm Noah Rose.
It's still 50-50. That's real. But here's the thing. When you do a little research, you realize that our dynamic is not so odd in this country, both now and historically. A Pew Research study from 2017 shows that only 23% of married households feature a husband as the sole breadwinner, a number that I guarantee you is lower in 2024 after COVID, and a number that has shrunk steadily since the 70s. But guess how many people do you think were living in a household where a man was a sole breadwinner in the 70s? You know, the good old days when men were men and women knew their place. 75%? 65%? No, 49%. So 50 years ago, when many of your parents were born, i.e. the children of your grandparents, only half of them were born into traditional patriarchal households. Most of them were born into homes where both parents worked. So why the fuck do we keep having this conversation, and do people keep getting away with saying modern women or modern men don't want to be men or women anymore? When was that ever actually a thing, except for in people's fantasies and propaganda around how gender is supposed to work? It really is shocking that there are people making content in 2024 about some bullshit that didn't even exist in 1974, yet we're still arguing about it in comment sections and with response videos and on TikTok and all those things. And it gets even more confusing when you add that racial aspect, because that 49% and 23% is all American men. So you can rest assured that those numbers drastically decrease explicitly for Black men, because historically Black men have always been excluded from all forms of well-paid labor or the tools needed to pursue well-paid labor. And because of this, Black households have since Reconstruction always been predominantly non-traditional. Historically, Black women have always worked, and Black men have always participated in home chores at higher levels than their white counterparts, though Not nearly enough if you pay attention to your grandmothers and great grandmothers. And I think this is partially what Nikki Giovanni is getting at watching her mother slave away in her home in order to fulfill a patriarchal role of a woman. When I say gender is a scam, I think a lot of people are gonna look at that as a radical hot take from the super left FD signifier and all his leftist liberal stuff, but I think you already agree with me. I think, and in fact, I know that a lot of you watching this feel in conflict with how you're perceived as a man or a woman on a daily basis. All of us constantly feel disconnected from the way that manhood and womanhood are often framed for us. We all feel like the world treats us unfairly based on our gender and that we have to act and present a certain way to be respected or seen as worthy or avoid being harmed in the world. Black men feel like they'll never be seen as capable of wisdom or leadership or gentleness and benevolence like white men.
Not this man right here, is all I'm gonna say.
And black women feel like they'll never be seen as soft or feminine or worthy of protection as white women. And this feeling is in many ways correct because those traits and ideologies around gender were never meant for us in the first place. They were never meant to be attached to black bodies going all the way back to slavery. That's not who we were groomed to be. We were meant to be beasts of burden. And whenever we get close to that idealistic image or framing of gender in this country, goalposts will be moved, fathers will be killed, mothers will be thrown in jail, and livestock will be stolen or towns will be burned down. We were never meant to actually participate in the framework of how white people in America organize their families and communities. And that's why they've always created barriers for our participation. White supremacy has made it abundantly clear from our first days in this country that real man and real woman always means real white.
There was this paper, and I'll figure out what the reference is. I can't remember, but it's called Psychological Androgyny. And it talks about how black women have had to occupy a mindset of psychological androgyny for quite some time. And it resonated with me and a number of the black women who read it, because it was like, we know the cult of true womanhood was never meant for us. And so we have operated outside of that for generations and been penalized for it romantically. You know, like that it's a necessity, but a resented necessity.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't like what being in the working world does to you, the strengths that you have to embody, you know, the disposition you have to take on. That's not feminine, that's not attractive, that's not beautiful. But our household can't survive if you don't do this work. You know, like, it's like financially, we can't take care of a family without it. Mm-hmm. But I want you to not bring that home. And then to your point with what Nikki Giovanni is saying, it's like, well, when you're out in the world dealing with whiteness and, you know, being excommunicated from white patriarchy, but wanting to hold on to a form of patriarchy that's your own, don't bring that home either. Especially, and this is, you know, this is the toxic part of it, especially if you ain't bringing enough money to be bringing that home.
Right. Because white femininity and there's always been a difference.
Yeah.
There's always been a difference in how white women are expected and allowed to show up versus how black women are expected and allowed to show up. And that should be understood. Yeah. Right. And so there is a little bit of a rub in that there are some spaces in the discourse where it's black women trying to attain white standards of femininity. Mm-hmm. And
I think that's a lot of it.
And good luck. Good luck. I can't speak to you. I don't know. I'm not on that side of TikTok. So yeah, so that's,
and if you get too close to it, that's when, even if you were to get close to it, they will shift the goalposts. This is something really powerful that Dr. Hargens pointed out, is that there've always been black women operating in divine femininity, higher femininity spaces, hyper femininity, whatever. Mm-hmm. And they still got treated like shit. The scene from Color Purple is such a perfect example of this.
Your children are so clean.
I wish I could show you this clip in its entirety, but unfortunately here on YouTube, a lot of movies, especially black movies, have extremely strict copyright rules, meaning that if I only show 5-10 seconds of this classic film from over 30 years ago, it will get copyright struck and YouTube will take all of my money and possibly even give me a channel strike. That's one of the reasons why I joined Nebula, so that I can make videos like this and like so many other videos on my channel that engage with black media but don't have to worry about being treated like a bootlegger just for talking about it in a video. While this will not make or break the video, if you do want to see this video uncut, again, sign up for my streaming service Nebula, link in the description. But when has white supremacy ever stopped us? We still seek to attain and affirm our gender unflinchingly. And through that, we tend to speak of this performance as innate and natural, despite the fact that this Americanized concept of gender was not really native to our origins in Africa. In Africa, there are a multitude of ways that different cultures conceptualize men and women, male and female. Some societies were patriarchal, some were matriarchal. There was no one way African civilizations constructed gender roles. In reality, the way we perform gender and patriarchy right now is based on European ideals of gender and community and organizing, where women are mostly property, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't want to get further into that. But I want to ask, how did it become that we got so invested in this framework? What really had us on board for the American dream of gender like we are now? After slavery and during Reconstruction, the belief and policy was that freed slaves should now figure out a way to model themselves in the ways of the nation that they were in. Of course, some people got sent out of the country and there's a bunch of different plans, but overall, most black people were just trying to get on with their lives, and they were getting on with their lives in the only way that they kind of understood, which was to mimic the things that they had been doing up until this point and the ways of the white people that once oppressed and controlled them. And if you know anything about your history of post-slavery, you know how that went. So eventually we began to fight for our right to self-determine and engage in the behavior and lives that we desire. By the 1950s, the American Civil Rights Movement rises up as the biggest wave of organized resistance against white supremacy and structural racism that the country had ever seen, but not without flaws. And one major flaw was the innate social conservatism of the movement, which manifested in the push for integration into the dominant social order, including a focus on traditional gender roles and patriarchal culture, something that created significant turmoil within the movement, eventually leading to divisions within the movement and it falling out of favor. A lot of people don't know that everybody within the civil rights movement didn't get along, and there were issues with sexism, with the women feeling like they were being treated as second-class citizens. And modern scholars have gone as far as to describe the civil rights movement as a civil rights movement for black men. Toward the end of the 1960s, however, the civil rights movement had become more open to radical ideology and a little less beholden to conservative thoughts. You see MLK marching with future Pan-Africanist Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture, and calling for reparations, a shift in tone that is likely what got him killed, which opens the door for an even more black radical power movement to take root. By the early 70s, in major cities across the country, black people, black men, and women are fighting the system much more directly. Some are low-key waging unilateral warfare against the state. While much of the civil rights movement was initially seeking to make room for black people in the dominant system, the Black Power movement was very different in that it was looking to tear the system down completely. And getting back to our core topic, because they were looking to tear the system down, the Black Power movement was much more progressive around gender than any of its predecessors. Now, this isn't to say that the Black Power movement didn't have issues with sexism itself, but it was very explicit in acknowledging the problem of sexism and seeking to dismantle it. It recognized that sexism and patriarchy were basically tools of fascism and an oppressive state. So black women had prominent roles of leadership in many aspects of these movements. Anti-misogyny was explicitly written into the bylaws of the Black Panther Party. And for a moment in that unity, black men and women had the powers that be worried. And in the face of the ongoing struggle and unrest that came from both the civil rights movement and the later Black Power movement, you see the powers that be begin to capitulate over the course of time. So between the 1950s and the 1970s, we get certain victories in the form of legislation such as affirmative action, Roe v. Wade, Miranda rights, and of course, the Civil Rights Bill. And the outcome was unprecedented advances for African-American people, which is very good. But it does have a few unintended consequences. Something that writers Too Black and Razul Mowat call laundering black rage that we talked about on a recent podcast.
Was from the book Black Against Empire. They made a point about why the Black Panthers declined. There's like a lot of people point just to repression, like the COINTELPRO program and stuff. That's definitely a major part of it. But another part is just affirmative action programs. You know, the end of the Vietnam War, the end of the, or the end of the draft, more specifically before the war, the end of the draft. You know, people just, because the point was to show that you don't take this revolutionary route because you can go get a job here, because there is a chance in America, because there is opportunity, right? But the funny thing is,
I hope this nigga don't talk that fast in real life, because that's ridiculous. My brain hurts.
it's the rage that creates that opportunity. If people didn't burn the shit down, if people weren't willing to go the revolutionary route, that concession never happens.
Basically, after getting these wins, we got a lot of new opportunities, and there was suddenly a rush for integration again within this dominant social order. Folks that were trying to fight the power and dismantle the system suddenly cut their hair and pressed or permed it and updated their resumes and traded their black jackets and dashikis for suits and dresses. And with this, the egalitarian dynamic between black men and women that had been somewhat developing and really was relatively normal if you look at
Egalitarian is the word. Egalitarian. Y'all remind me what that is.
previous eras became even more patriarchal because patriarchy was considered and presented as the ideal. And we see this reflected in so many aspects of black life and government and social policy. An easy example of this is where that black shows and movies of the 70s began to turn in the 80s and 90s, going from depicting black life within certain working class struggles to overly emphasizing progress and prosperity in black folks who were elites. And these elites often had much more traditional gender roles. Of course, this isn't every show or every episode, and there's definitely something to be said about black media not always being about the struggle, but there's also something to be said about how depictions of prosperity and black excellence tend to subterfuge and kind of throw in certain messages and ideologies that in the long run aren't helpful to all black people. And they definitely got away with some bullshit when it comes to gender. My favorite example is Claire Huxtable, who is a whole ass lawyer in The Cosby Show, but you would never know by the way she's portrayed in the show. I literally can't think of a single moment in that show where she actually did some lawyer shit. She was only a mom. You combine that with shows like Family Matters and The Fresh Prince and a bunch of other stuff, and you suddenly recognize what type of messages had become normal to people my age and younger. One of the most interesting relics from this transitional time is a promotional video partially created by black magazines like Jet and Ebony called How to Sell to the Negro.
I've got a story here that I think is big, really big, because it's bound to have a terrific impact on business. I'm talking about a new market, a big new market, millions upon millions of new prospects with $15 billion to spend. That's right, I said $15 billion. That's a lot of money, isn't it? Yes, this is the market we're talking about, the new Negro family. Their name is Wells or Wilson, Smith or Brown or Alexander or Breen. They live in Chicago, in Atlanta or New York.
And in this video, they present this growing world where black people are able to enter into the dominant social order, full of prosperity, apart from racism, and of course, with that traditional gender idealized family unit of a man as the patriarch, the white as a submissive helpmate or whatever they call it, and two beautiful children. And as I alluded to a second ago, if you're a certain age and certain background, this is the image of blackness that you aspired to in your youth. If you were the child of college-educated black folks in the late 70s to the late 80s, you probably had it pretty good. You were the talented 10th or the children of the talented 10th. Some of y'all went to Jack and Jill's. Some of y'all went to big mega churches. Some of y'all went to HBCUs. We are the children of the elite, and we were expected to follow in the footsteps towards this low-key, very white image of what being black excellence was supposed to be. And all of these institutions are invested in reproducing that image. They surround us with the false reality of what could be, despite the fact that racism didn't go away, and most black men still didn't have access to the resources needed to be a solo provider. Black women still weren't treated as feminine in the outside world or seen as soft or being worthy of protection. A few people were able to make it, probably some of y'all's parents, but most black folks were barely any closer to attaining that idealized image, and thus we continue to get scammed. But here's the thing. For black men, this dynamic plays out in a way that offers us a few scenarios out. So maybe you won't be Uncle Phil or Cliff Huxtable, but you could be an old playboy like Billy Dee Williams or an OG like OG Bobby Johnson. Maybe you'll dedicate your life to a cause or a craft. Men like Kevin Samuels and Umar Johnson are seen as champions of ideal masculinity in the Black family and don't have their own families. That's one of the benefits of patriarchy. But for women, the pressure is very different. For Black women particularly, there's no escape for this shit. A woman without a man, without a family, is considered broken in our society. And a Black woman in that scenario, especially one that happened to have children out of wedlock, is considered a deviant who is actively contributing to harming the community. You can be the most successful, beautiful, talented Black woman in the world, but without a man or kids with a man, people will look at you side-eye. But paradoxically, and maybe as a byproduct of that added pressure, we all know that Black women are doing a lot better than Black men as a unit. In fact, most Black women are able to stay out of trouble, get education, get the good job, get the look, and do all the things that society tells them they can't do. But then there's still that last most important piece, getting the man, and that shit is hard. And it leaves a lot of Black women in a vulnerable space of desperation, and that's where a guy like Derrick Jaxn comes in.
So, I'm not going to take away from his video any longer. But I think he has me beat jumping back into this Derrick guy. I'll personally watch the rest, but I don't like to steal from content creators. I just want to pass on this wisdom, which is what these streams are about. So if you enjoyed this, like and comment. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what stuck out.